Come closer, you've felt it, haven't you? That shiver down your spine when a movement feels wrong, not just clumsy but alien, as if your own body isn't quite your own. This isn't just a feeling, it's real and it's watching. Imagine a world where your very gestures, the simple acts of living, could turn against you, where the echoes of what you do become sentient. They detach, they repeat, and then they compel. A subtle tug at first, then a relentless pull. This is a story of those echoes, of a dance you never learned but are forced to perform. Join us in the shadows, like and subscribe to never miss a nightmare, because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and it will be with you. Elara lived in silence, a mime. Her world was carved from precise movements, from the unspoken language of the body. Her small apartment, a quiet sanctuary, echoed only with the whisper of her own disciplined breath. Every gesture was a word, every pose a sentence. This control was her refuge, her strength. A wall built against a past failure, a performance that had fallen tragically silent when words were most needed. She practiced daily, hours spent refining invisible walls, lifting imaginary weights, pulling on unseen ropes. Each movement was isolated, perfected, a testament to her absolute command over her own physical form. The air in her studio was still, thick with the scent of old wood and quiet concentration. A single beam of sunlight cut through the dust, illuminating her solitary dance. A dance of perfect, deliberate control. She moved with a silent grace, an artist painting pictures in the air. Her body was her canvas, her instrument. Every muscle, every tendon obeyed her will, or so she believed. Then a flicker, a tiny tremor in her right hand, a momentary, involuntary twitch of her index finger. She paused, frowning slightly beneath her mask. Fatigue, she reasoned. She shook her hand, dismissing it. Her discipline was absolute. Such small imperfections were unacceptable. She resumed her practice, pushing the fleeting distraction from her mind. But it happened again. A subtle shiver through her arm, a brief, uncontrolled jerk of her shoulder. It was like a static shock, gone as quickly as it came. Unsettling, but still, she blamed tiredness. Her body was usually a perfect machine. Every movement was a choice. These tiny, unbidden spasms felt like a betrayal, a tiny crack in her carefully constructed control. She pushed harder, demanding more from herself. Precision, flawless execution. The twitches became more frequent, tiny ripples in the calm surface of her practiced stillness, each one a tiny bell of unease. Was it stress, lack of sleep, the lingering ghost of her past failure, whispering doubts into her very bones? She couldn't afford such weakness. Not now, not ever. She finished her session, exhausted, but not from the effort. It was the effort of suppressing these alien movements, of wresting control back from an unseen force that truly drained her. Later that day, seeking a change of scenery, she walked through the city streets. The usual rush of people, a symphony of uncontrolled, everyday gestures, a stark contrast to her own world. She watched them, a detached observer. The hurried strides, the casual waves, the animated conversations. Each person a puppet of their own will, their own impulses, or so it seemed. Her gaze fell upon a man waiting at a bus stop. Nothing remarkable about him, just another face in the crowd, until he moved. His right hand, hanging loosely by his side, suddenly twitched. A quick, jerky motion. He rotated his wrist inward, then outward, then inward again, 3 times, nonsensical, repetitive. Elara, the expert in human movement, found it odd. It wasn't a nervous tic. It was too deliberate, yet too meaningless, like a piece of a forgotten dance, performed by a body that didn't know it was dancing. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the motion stopped. The man lowered his hand, looked around, as if nothing had happened. He checked his watch. Utterly normal, too normal. A cold sensation snaked up Elara's own right arm. A strange, internal chill that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air. It started in her fingers, then spread like ice water in her veins. And then, without her conscious thought, her own hand began to move, slowly, imperceptibly at first, but then with a strange, undeniable force. Her wrist turned inward. A gasp caught in her throat. She tried to stop it, to clench her fist, to hold her arms still, but her muscles felt like they weren't hers. They were obeying a different command. Outward, outward, 3 times. The exact, nonsensical, repetitive gesture of the man at the bus stop. Her body, her instrument, was performing a movement she had not willed. The cold sensation vanished as quickly as it came. Her hand fell still, her muscles once again her own. But the horror had taken root. This was not fatigue. This was something else, something terrifying. She looked at the man. He was still there, oblivious. He hadn't seen her. He hadn't felt the echo, but she had, and it had touched her, possessed her even for a moment. Her mind raced. A mime whose entire being was defined by control, by deliberate motion. To have that control stolen, even for a fleeting second, was an existential dread. What was this? A trick of the mind? A symptom of her own past trauma resurfacing? Or something far more insidious, far more real, taking hold? She walked home in a daze, every step feeling heavier than the last. The city, once a vibrant backdrop, now felt like a stage for unseen performers, pulling unseen strings. Back in her quiet apartment, the silence felt different, not comforting, but watchful, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for her to make another move. She looked at her hands, her instruments, the tools of her art. Were they truly hers, or were they merely rented, awaiting the next command from an unknown master? The memory of the stranger's gesture and her own involuntary mimicry played on a loop in her mind. A simple wrist turn, so small, so meaningless, but so utterly terrifying. She tried to rationalize it. A spasm, a momentary lapse, a trick of the light, a figment of her overstressed imagination. But the cold dread in her gut told a different story. What if it wasn't a one-time event? What if these kinetic echoes were everywhere? Subtle at first, then growing stronger, more demanding. What if they were contagious? The thought was a venomous whisper, a professional mime whose very existence was about control, losing control of her own body. The irony was a cruel, twisted joke. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. Her masked face stared back, her eyes wide, questioning. Was that fear she saw, or something else, lurking just beneath the surface? The silence in the room pressed in. She felt a phantom tug on her right arm again, a ghost of a movement, a memory of a command, not hers, never hers. She clenched her jaw, a silent scream building in her chest. The mime, master of the unspoken, was speechless. Her body, her voice had been spoken for, and she didn't know how to stop it. What would you do if your own movements betrayed you? If your body became a stage for a dance you didn't choose, what would you do when the echoes begin to move you? The cold dread had not left Elara. It clung to her, a suffocating shroud, ever since her hand had moved without her will. The memory of that stranger's gesture, mirrored by her own body, was a wound that refused to heal. She tried to sleep, but the phantom tugs on her limbs kept her awake, her muscles tense and ready to betray her. The next morning, the twitches were more frequent. A sudden jerk of her head as she poured coffee, a sharp, uncontrolled flick of her wrist while reaching for a book. They were small, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to Elara they were monstrous invasions, each one a tiny tremor in the fortress of her self-control. She walked the city streets again, her eyes now searching, and she saw them everywhere. A woman waiting for a bus, her foot tapping a complex, meaningless rhythm. A man at a cafe, his fingers drumming a bizarre pattern on the table, then stopping abruptly as if waking from a trance. These weren't just nervous habits. Elara knew movement. She saw the precise, repeated nature of these gestures. They were like broken records, playing the same few notes over and over. And the people performing them seemed unaware, their faces blank, their eyes distant. What would you do if you saw your own actions reflected, distorted, in the bodies of strangers? What if those reflections were the first signs of something far more sinister, something spreading through the city like an unseen sickness? The air itself seemed to hum with these unseen currents. Elara started to feel a strange, almost physical pressure, a subtle tugging sensation whenever she witnessed these involuntary movements. It was like a whisper, urging her to join the silent, grotesque dance. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, the silence was broken by something new. A shimmer, faint at first, like heat rising from pavement, but in the air right in front of her. It was a faint, ghostly outline of a hand twisting slowly. It was the same wrist rotation she had seen on the man at the bus stop, the same motion that had hijacked her own hand. It repeated over and over, a silent, spectral loop. A kinetic ghost dancing in her living room, visible only to her. Her breath hitched. This was not a hallucination. This was real. The echoes weren't just compelling living bodies, they were manifesting. Detached from their originators, they now floated, shimmering in the air. A terrifying visual confirmation of her worst fears. The next day she saw more. A shimmering head tilt in the park, repeating endlessly above a bench. A spectral finger tap in the library, hovering over a forgotten book. These kinetic ghosts were everywhere, silent conductors of an invisible orchestra. They were faint, almost imperceptible, like distortions in the air. But once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. They were the true masters, the unseen strings, pulling at the world, making it dance to their nonsensical tune. Elara's own body became a battleground. Her rigorous mime practice, once her sanctuary, was now a torment. Every controlled movement was met with resistance, with phantom tugs and sudden, unwanted twitches. Her muscles felt like they were arguing with her. She tried to perfect an invisible wall, her hands pushing against unseen resistance. But her fingers would suddenly splay, her wrist would jerk, mimicking a movement she had seen a stranger perform hours ago. Her art was being corrupted. The control she so desperately needed, the precision that defined her, was slipping away. Her body, once a perfectly tuned instrument, was becoming a discordant mess. A puppet whose strings were being pulled by a dozen different, unseen hands. What does it mean to be yourself when your body is no longer your own? When your most intimate expressions, your very gestures, are hijacked and twisted into something grotesque and alien? Is that still you, or just a shell? The kinetic ghosts grew clearer, not just shimmering outlines, but almost solid, transparent forms, like figures made of heat haze. They danced in the corners of her vision, repeating their nonsensical movements, always just out of reach. She started to notice them more in public spaces, too. A ghostly hand mirroring a cashier's precise movement, then continuing long after the living hand had stopped. A spectral headshake above a politician, even as he nodded his agreement. These echoes were not just residual energy. They felt aware, like silent, mocking observers waiting for their chance to possess. Their dance was a lure, a trap, drawing the living into their horrifying performance. Elara began to feel their pull more strongly. A phantom string attached to her arm, her leg, her head. It wasn't just a suggestion now, it was a command. A silent, insistent voice telling her to move, to mimic, to join. She tried to fight it, to assert her will, but the effort was exhausting. It was like wrestling with shadows, with something that had no physical form, yet could command her very flesh. Her autonomy was eroding, piece by terrifying piece. She had a performance scheduled, a deeply personal piece, a silent story of loss and unspoken truth. It was her chance to finally convey what words had failed to. But how could she perform when her body was no longer truly hers? The thought of facing an audience, of having her most vulnerable expression hijacked by these grotesque echoes, filled her with a terror colder than any stage fright. It was a terror of public, humiliating possession. She practiced in secret, pushing through the spasms, fighting the unseen strings. Her movements were stiff, forced. The grace was gone, replaced by a desperate, mechanical struggle. Each session was a testament to her losing battle. The kinetic ghosts were bolder now, dancing closer. Sometimes she saw them right beside her, mirroring her movements, then twisting them into something obscene. A mocking parody of her art. Her reflection in the studio mirror showed a stranger, not just the mask, but the eyes behind it. They were hollow, haunted, filled with a fear that went beyond words. She was becoming a vessel, a stage for something else. The night of the performance arrived. The small theater was hushed, expectant. Elara stood backstage, her heart pounding, not with excitement, but with a cold, paralyzing dread. Her body felt alien, a stranger waiting to betray her. She walked onto the stage, the single spotlight blinding her. She began her piece, a delicate dance of grief and unspoken words. For a moment, she felt a flicker of her old control, a brief return to her true self. But then the tugging started. Small at first, a tremor in her leg, a twitch in her shoulder. She fought it, pouring every ounce of her will into maintaining her performance, into telling her story. The kinetic ghosts were there. She could see them in the periphery of the stage lights, shimmering and dancing, their grotesque forms mocking her every move. They were closing in, their presence a suffocating weight. Her arm was supposed to reach out, a gesture of longing, of desperate yearning. She willed it to move, to convey the raw emotion of her piece, but it resisted. It fought her. Then a violent wrench. Her arm was not hers. It was yanked, not outward, but sideways, in a grotesque, jerky spasm. Her hand curled into a claw, her fingers twitching a nonsensical rhythm. It was the movement of a broken doll. A gasp rippled through the audience. Elara froze, her heart seizing in her chest. The performance, her desperate attempt to communicate, was ruined. Not by her, but by the unseen strings, the malevolent echoes. She looked down at her arm, then back at the audience. They saw it. They saw her failure, her humiliation. But they didn't see the kinetic ghost, shimmering faintly around her arm, still performing its horrifying, repetitive twitch. Tears streamed down her face, hidden by the mask, but her eyes, wide and terrified, told the story. Her body, her art, her very self had been publicly stolen. She was a puppet, exposed, humiliated. She stumbled off stage, the applause a confused, distant murmur. Back in the darkness, she collapsed, her body shaking not with grief, but with the lingering twitches, the echoes still dancing within her. Her body was no longer her own. It was a vessel, inhabited by 1,000 unseen strings, each one pulling her into a dance of madness. The control she cherished, the autonomy she fought for, was gone. What does it feel like when your very movements betray you, when your body becomes a stage for a dance you didn't choose, a performance orchestrated by unseen, malevolent forces? It is a horror beyond words. Elara lay there, listening to the echoes within her, feeling the phantom strings. She was no longer a mime. She was a marionette, a toy, and the show, she knew, was far from over. She tried to move, to get up, to escape, but her body resisted. It wanted to perform, it wanted to dance. And this time, the echoes were not subtle, they were demanding. Her arm rose slowly, deliberately, into the same grotesque spasm that had ruined her performance. Then her other arm, then her head. She was dancing, and she couldn't stop. What would you do when the echoes become your master? Her body moved, a grotesque puppet on unseen strings. The dance of madness had begun, a horrifying performance orchestrated by forces she couldn't comprehend. Her arms, her legs, her head, each limb twisted and jerked in a chaotic, nonsensical rhythm. She was a marionette, and the show was far from over. The involuntary movements lasted for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only minutes. Each spasm was a violation, a chilling reminder that her body was no longer her own. She fought, straining every muscle, but her will was a whisper against the roaring command of the echoes. Have you ever felt utterly powerless in your own skin? When the echoes finally released her, she lay gasping, drenched in a cold sweat. Her muscles ached, not from exertion, but from the brutal struggle for control. The silence that followed was not relief, but a terrifying pause, a breath held before the next assault. She knew this was just the beginning. The next day, the city seemed to pulse with a new, disturbing energy. The kinetic echoes were bolder, clearer. People on the street performed strange, repetitive gestures, not just twitches, but entire short dances. A woman at a crosswalk would suddenly clap her hands 3 times, then resume normal activity, oblivious. A man in a cafe, sipping his coffee, would abruptly raise his arms above his head, then slowly lower them, only to repeat the motion seconds later. His eyes were vacant, his face expressionless. It was a silent, unsettling ballet performed by unwitting dancers. These weren't subtle anymore. They were distinct, almost choreographed, each person a single, broken record playing a fragment of an invisible tune. Elara saw the kinetic ghosts shimmering around them, faint but undeniable, guiding their every move. They were no longer whispers, They were commands. The horror deepened with each observation. What if this was spreading? What if the echoes were learning, growing stronger, creating more complex dances? The thought made her stomach clench. Her own past was a testament to the power of unspoken, uncontrolled movement. Desperate for answers, Elara retreated to the dusty archives of the city library. She sought out old texts, forgotten lore, anything that might explain this terrifying phenomenon. She ignored the other patrons, some of whom performed their own strange, repetitive gestures. She found obscure references to unseen choreographers in ancient theatrical texts, tales of performers whose bodies were taken over by shadow dances, their movements no longer their own. The language was archaic, but the descriptions were chillingly familiar. Another text spoke of a motion sickness that twisted bodies, forcing them into grotesque mimicry. It described how individuals would repeat gestures, growing more frantic and meaningless until their very identity was lost. The words were a cold hand around her throat. Local myths, too, held disturbing clues. Old wives' tales of spirit dancers who stole the movements of the living, leaving them hollow. They described invisible threads, pulling at limbs, turning people into puppets. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. The research offered no comfort, only confirmation of her worst fears. These kinetic echoes were not new. They were ancient, a pervasive, malevolent force that had haunted humanity for centuries, feeding on movement, weaponizing expression. And now they had found her. Her own body became a constant battleground. Simple daily tasks, once second nature, turned into agonizing struggles for control. Reaching for a cup of water, her arm would suddenly jerk sideways, then upward, spilling the contents. Trying to tie her shoelaces, her fingers would splay and twitch, performing a bizarre, intricate dance of their own, refusing to obey her command. It was like wrestling with a ghost inside her own skin. What if your hands refused to do your bidding? The periods of involuntary movement grew longer. A momentary twitch became a 10-second spasm. A brief jerk became a full minute of her body contorting and mimicking unseen commands. Her autonomy was eroding, not in pieces, but in chunks. She would find herself walking down a hallway, only for her legs to suddenly change direction, pulling her toward an empty room. Her head would snap to the side, her eyes fixed on nothing, her body rigid and unresponsive to her will. She was a passenger in her own flesh. The kinetic ghosts in her apartment grew bolder, more distinct. They no longer just shimmered. They had form like figures made of transparent glass. They danced around her, their movements precise, synchronized, and utterly terrifying. One evening, as she sat trying to read, a ghost appeared directly in front of her. It was a shimmering, translucent figure, its arms raised, its hands splayed. It performed a slow, agonizing rotation of its wrists, a gesture of profound despair. Elara froze, her blood ran cold. This was not just any gesture. This was the exact, failed pose from her past traumatic performance. The moment her mime art had crumbled, her message lost, leading to unspeakable tragedy. It was the gesture of her greatest failure. The kinetic ghost repeated the gesture, slowly, deliberately. Its invisible strings reached out, not just as a suggestion, but as an undeniable command. Elara felt a terrible pull, a familiar, agonizing pressure on her own wrists. Her body began to move. Her arms rose, her hands splayed. Her wrists rotated slowly, painfully, into that exact, despairing pose. The pose of her failure. The echo was forcing her to reenact her most horrific memory. Tears streamed down her masked face, hidden from the outside world, but felt acutely by her. The ghost repeated the motion, and her body, her unwilling puppet, repeated it with it, over and over. A mocking, endless loop of her past tragedy. Each repetition was a fresh wound, a reopening of old scars. The kinetic echo wasn't just compelling her, it was torturing her, weaponizing her own history against her. It was a performance, and she was the star of her own nightmare. She screamed, but no sound came out. Her mime training, once a source of strength, now made her torment even more profound. She could not speak, could not cry out, could not beg for release. Only her body could move, and it was not hers to command. The ghost danced, and Elara danced with it. Her mind screamed, but her body obeyed. The line between artistic expression and horrifying possession had not just blurred, it had vanished. She was a horrifying, living canvas for the echo's malevolent art. This was not just loss of control, this was psychological torment. The echo knew her deepest fear, her greatest regret, and it was forcing her to relive it over and over in a silent, endless loop. It was a monster that fed on her very soul. What does it mean to be haunted by your own gestures? To have your past failures replayed, not in your mind, but through your very flesh? This was a horror far beyond any ghost story. This was a nightmare of the self. The echo's grip tightened. It wasn't just the specific gesture now. It was a series of movements, a full, small performance. A reenactment of the entire, tragic failure played out through her unwilling body. Her body was a stage, and the echo was the director. She could feel her identity eroding, her sense of self dissolving with each forced movement. Was she still Elara, the mime, the artist of control, or was she merely an instrument, a vessel for the echo's malevolent dance? The kinetic ghost grew more solid, its form almost opaque, as if feeding on her terror, on her forced performance. It was a monstrous mime, a terrifying reflection of her own art, turned against her. She thrashed, she struggled, she fought with every fiber of her being. But the echo was stronger. It was a relentless puppeteer, and its strings were woven into her very muscles, her very bones. There was no escape. The force dance continued, a silent scream of agony and humiliation. The movements became more frantic, more grotesque. Her body was a broken thing, twisting and turning, a macabre spectacle for an unseen audience. She closed her eyes, trying to retreat into the darkness of her own mind, but even there, the phantom tugs persisted. The echo had invaded her physical self, and now it was reaching for her consciousness, for her very thoughts. What if it wasn't just her body it wanted? What if it wanted her mind too, to force her to willingly participate in its terrible dance, to accept her role as its puppet? The thought was a new, chilling layer of dread. She opened her eyes, and the kinetic ghost was still there, performing its mocking dance. But now, it wasn't just mirroring her past. It was adding new movements, subtle shifts that made the old pose even more grotesque, more agonizing. It was evolving, learning. The echo was adapting, creating new tortures, new ways to break her. This was not a mindless repetition. This was intelligent, malevolent cruelty. It was playing with her, toying with her sanity. The force dance continued, hour after hour. Her body screamed in protest, but the echo was relentless. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own flesh, forced to perform a dance of despair and humiliation, orchestrated by a monster of pure movement. Her muscles burned, her joints screamed, but the echo did not tire. It only grew stronger, more demanding. The very air around her thrummed with its power, each movement a hammer blow to her dwindling will. Is there any escape from a monster that lives inside you? She felt a terrifying shift. The familiar, agonizing pose from her past was no longer just being repeated. It was being twisted, lengthened, becoming the foundation for a new, more complex, more sinister dance. A dance she had never known, but was now being forced to learn. The kinetic echo was no longer just mocking her past. It was building a new future for her, a future of endless, horrifying performances. Her body was its instrument, her life its stage. And as the new, twisted dance began, Elara knew, with chilling certainty, that she was no longer just a mime. She was the ghost's dance. What would you do when the echoes begin to choreograph your very existence? Her body moved, an unwanted ballet, not twitches, but long, intricate sequences she hadn't willed. She was a puppet. What does it mean when your body is not your own? Exhaustion was immense. The echoes did not tire, forcing sequence after sequence. Her mind screamed for rest, but her body obeyed. Sleep replaced by this cruel, endless dance. These new performances were longer, demanding. Entire acts, intricate, nonsensical, limbs swept, bent, twisted, without consent. An unwilling instrument. Could you endure such invasion? She felt every tug, as if invisible strings attached to her bones. Her body felt hollow, animated. The mime, master of form, was now a marionette. Past control, a cruel joke. The kinetic echoes grew stronger, their grip undeniable. They commanded. Their silent presence, a tangible weight. Each forced movement chipped away at her identity. She couldn't face this alone. Warn her friend, Anya, her only hope. But how to explain horror that stole movements? How to speak when her body fought her? She called Anya, words slurred, twisted, jaw stiff, tongue heavy. Echoes controlled her voice, making her sound like a drunkard. As she spoke, her body betrayed her. Arms shot out, retracted, aggressive, head jerked. Anya heard disturbing sounds, movements. Gestures grew aggressive, alarming. Hands clenched, feet shuffled. Anya's voice grew distant, fearful. Elara, what's wrong? Elara wanted to scream, body a weapon, pushing Anya away. Phone disconnected. Lifeline severed. Echoes one, isolating her. Next day, city a macabre stage. Elara walked, body twitching, eyes fixed on horror. Echoes caused harm, not just compelling. Woman slapped herself, gasped. Man crushed own fingers, not accidents, forced violence. The echoes escalated. They moved like dolls, bodies not their own, faces blank or fleeting terror. Echoes left them confused, hurting. Could your hand betray you? Echoes were malevolent. They delighted in pain, confusion, lost control. A cruel game, humanity their plaything, horror escalating. Elara felt phantom tugs, mirroring violent acts. Hand twitched, arm rose, terrifying premonition. Fear, a cold knot inside. City transformed, a vast, horrifying stage. Every corner, a disturbing performance. Air thick with unseen strings, pulling at victims. Where to escape this relentless horror? She needed sanctuary to regain control. Apartment unsafe. Streets a nightmare. No refuge. She thought of her art, places of purposeful movement, theaters, studios, where expression was paramount, a key or more corruption. Her search led to an old, abandoned theater. Marquee faded, windows boarded, the Grand Majestic, a place of past performances. This building, once vibrant, now silent, a ghost of glory, every gesture left an imprint, air saturated with kinesthetic energy. As she approached, Elara felt a strange pull, not violent tugs, but a deeper, resonant vibration. A magnetic force, frightening, compelling. Air around the theater felt heavy, thick, laden with invisible threads. Thousands of unseen strings, stretching, waiting. This place felt like a nexus. Trembling hand, Elara pushed open a creaking side door. Dust, decay filled her, darkness absolute. She stepped inside into the beast. Vast, silent auditorium. Rows of dusty seats, dark stage. Silence here was different, full of echoes, whispers of past performances. Her gaze fixed on the stage, heart of the theater where movement focused. In its darkness, a powerful presence. Echoes strong here. She almost saw them, ghosts of 1,000 gestures swirling above the stage, all fuel for malevolent echoes. Walking down the aisle, a chilling cold spot. Icy air, goosebumps, not drafts, presence of something ancient, hungry. Then above the stage, a shimmer, not faint but clear, form coalescing like heat haze, larger than any echo she'd seen, more powerful. A kinetic ghost, but different. It moved with terrifying grace, echo of a grand, dramatic gesture, sweeping arms, powerful stance, immense scale. Elara felt watched, not just by this echo, but by countless others. Unseen in shadows, they waited for her to move, to perform. The grand echo above the stage grew stronger, solid, opaque. It fed on history, becoming real, a monstrous mime on a decaying stage. Then Elara felt it, a new pull, deep, overwhelming force in her core. Echoes command, demanding response, performance. It wanted her. Her body responded, unwillingly. Arms rose, mimicking the echo's grand sweep. Spine arched, head tilted back, drawn into the macabre play. This was its stage now, the abandoned theater, a temple for echoes. Elara, the mime, its unwilling star, her greatest fear realized. The grand echo descended, slowly, majestically. Shimmering form grew larger, more imposing, coming for her, to claim her, to make her its own. A monstrous partner, terrifying choreographer. Elara, powerless, body already moving, dancing to its tune. Possession begun anew, grander, terrifying. She felt identity slipping, dissolving. Line between Elara and puppet blurred. Was anything left of her will, just a vessel for this ancient horror? Thought was a cold blade. Eternity of this. Endless performance, terrifying dance, orchestrated by malevolent entity, no awakening. The grand echo was upon her, its shimmering form engulfing, movements hers. She felt its cold, aphysical presence merging with her flesh, taking her body and soul. What would you do when the stage is set? Monster demands performance. Body no longer your own, possession just beginning. When echoes become your very self. The grand echo had engulfed her, not with a physical touch, but an invasion of pure motion. Elara's body, already moving without her will, felt colder, heavier. She was no longer just dancing with the echo, she was becoming it. Her mind screamed, a silent protest against the silent takeover. What would you do when your very self is being erased by a phantom dance? But Elara was a mime, Her life was control. Even as the echo commanded her limbs, a tiny spark of defiance flickered. She tried to fight back, not with strength, but with her art. She attempted anti-gestures, movements designed to negate, to stop, to resist the foreign commands. A silent refusal. Her arm was being forced upward, a grotesque imitation of a wave. Elara tried to clench her fist, to pull it down, to assert her own will. It was like wrestling with a ghost woven into her very muscles. A terrifying, internal struggle. Could you fight a force that lives inside you? For a fleeting moment, she felt a shift. A flicker of her own control. Her arm paused. A tiny victory. A breath of hope in the suffocating grip of the echo. But the echo was ancient, patient, and it was learning her defiance. The echoes responded, not with pain but with mockery. Her anti-gesture was twisted. Her arm, instead of resisting, began to flail wildly like a broken toy. Then it mimicked a child's tantrum, stomping and shaking. Humiliation, a new weapon. She tried to create an invisible wall, a mime's ultimate defense, pushing against the encroaching horror. The echoes turned it into a grotesque parody. Her hands slapped her own face, then clawed at her neck. A self-inflicted violence forced by unseen strings. The grand echo, still shimmering above the stage, seemed to pulse with amusement. It was not just controlling her, it was playing with her. A monstrous puppeteer, delighting in her desperate struggle, her futile defiance. What kind of entity finds joy in such torment? Her carefully honed discipline, her precise language of movement, was being corrupted. Every attempt to assert her will was met with a twisted, humiliating counter-performance. Her body was no longer just a puppet. It was a joke in a cruel, silent comedy. The echoes were not just taking her body, they were taking her art. They were proving that her cherished control was an illusion, that her very expressions could be weaponized against her. This was a horror deeper than physical pain. It was an assault on her very identity. She felt a sudden, sharp clarity amidst the terror. The research in the library, the ancient texts, this wasn't some new urban legend. This was old, very old. The kinetic echoes were not a modern phenomenon. They were an ancient, aphysical entity, not ghosts of the dead, but ghosts of movement itself. A formless thing that fed on the intent behind human gestures. It consumed the purpose, the meaning, and then reanimated the empty shell of the movement. Imagine every wave, every handshake, every loving embrace. The echo takes the why and leaves only the what. Then it weaponizes that empty what, twisting it, forcing it onto others. A dance without soul, a movement without meaning. Is that not the deepest horror? Elara realized the echoes thrived in places of concentrated movement, where intent was strongest. The theater, her studio, the bustling city streets. They were like magnets for this ancient hunger, drawing in the very essence of human action. The grand echo above the stage pulsed with this stolen intent. It was a nexus, a heart of the echo's power. It was absorbing the history of every performance, every gesture, every emotion that had ever graced this stage. This wasn't just physical possession, it was a conceptual horror. The very idea of purposeful movement, the foundation of human interaction, was being systematically dismantled, corrupted, and turned against itself. It was a violation of what it meant to be human. As Elara fought, she felt something else shifting, not just her body, but her mind. Memories felt distant, hazy. Faces, names, events from her past seemed to fade, replaced by the insistent rhythm of the forced movements. A memory of Anya, her friend, flickered, Anya's smile, but before she could hold on to it, her lips were forced into a grotesque, repetitive grimace. The memory was pushed out, replaced by the echo's command. This was more than just a dance, it was an erasure. The echoes were not just taking her body, they were slowly erasing her mind, replacing her personal history with their own nonsensical choreography. Her identity, her very self, was being overwritten, one forced movement at a time. What would be left of Elara? She tried to recall her past failure, the traumatic performance. The memory, once a vivid wound, was now fragmented. The despairing pose was there, yes, but it was now part of a longer, more abstract sequence. Its original meaning was lost, replaced by the echo's empty repetition. This was the true horror, not just being a puppet, but becoming a puppet whose memories were replaced by the puppeteer's dance. Her mind was becoming a stage for the echo's endless, terrifying performance. Her very thoughts were being choreographed. A new compulsion seized her, not a specific gesture, but a directional pull, deeper into the theater, downward. The grand echo above the stage seemed to compel her, guiding her with an invisible hand. She stumbled through a side door into a narrow, winding corridor. The air grew heavy, thick with a strange, vibrant hum. It was the same kinetic energy she'd felt in the city, but here it was amplified, raw, overwhelming. The corridor sloped downwards, leading her beneath the stage. The hum grew into a low thrum, a deep vibration that resonated in her bones. Her body felt like it was singing with it, vibrating in harmony with an unseen force. The air crackled with energy, not electricity, but pure, raw movement. It was the essence of countless gestures, compressed, focused, alive. This was where the echoes drew their power. This was their source. She pushed open a heavy wooden door, rotting and swollen with damp. Beyond it, a vast circular chamber. The thrumming was deafening now, a physical force that pressed against her. The air was thick, suffocating with kinesthetic energy. And in the center of the chamber, a pulsating core of light. Not a flame, not an object, but a sphere of pure, swirling energy. It was the heart of the kinetic echoes, a monstrous engine of stolen motion. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. A maelstrom of light and shadow, constantly shifting, constantly moving. It was every gesture, every dance, every human action distilled into a single malevolent core. It was the echoes made manifest. Elara felt an overwhelming pull towards it. Her body began to move, compelled, not a dance, but a slow, reverent approach. Like a moth drawn to a deadly flame, her every muscle strained to obey its silent command. As she drew closer, she saw it. Within the swirling energy, faint images flickered, not just abstract light, but fragments of human movement. A hand reaching, a foot stepping, a head turning, all absorbed, all fueling the monstrous core. And then she saw herself, a flicker of her own past, a precise mime gesture absorbed into the swirling mass. Her own art, her own being, was feeding this monstrosity. The horror was absolute. The echoes were not just taking her body and mind. They were consuming her very essence, her history, her art, turning it into raw fuel for their endless, terrifying dance. She was being erased, piece by terrifying piece. Her thoughts grew sluggish, fragmented. Memories of loved ones, of her life before this nightmare were harder to grasp. The echoes were winning. Her mind was becoming as much a puppet as her body. A chilling question formed in the remnants of her mind. Was there a point where Elara would cease to exist, where only the echoes remained, using her body as a vessel, her mind as a stage, her memories as fuel? The pulsation of the core intensified, beating like a monstrous heart. Each beat sent a wave of raw kinetic energy through the chamber, through Elara's body. It was calling to her, demanding her complete surrender. Her limbs began to contort, not in simple twitches, but in a grand, complex sequence of movements. A dance she had never learned, but her body performed it flawlessly. It was the echo's ultimate performance, and she was its star. She felt the grand echo from the stage above, now merged with the core, pulling her deeper into its rhythm. It was a symphony of stolen movement, and she was the conductor's unwilling instrument. Her autonomy was gone, replaced by a horrifying, collective will. Then a new sensation, not a pull but a push. From within the core, a single, shimmering, perfectly formed hand extended. Transparent, yet solid, it reached out, not to touch, but to offer a gesture. A specific gesture. It was the gesture of a mime, perfectly executed. An invisible box. The classic confinement. But this was no illusion. This was real. And it was being offered to her not as a challenge, but as an invitation. A prison perfectly crafted. Her own hands, already moving, began to mimic it. Slowly, deliberately, Elara's body began to build the invisible walls around herself. A cage of her own making, compelled by the very entity that fed on her art. Her greatest expression turned into her ultimate trap. The invisible box closed around her. Her hands completed the final wall, then rested, trapped. She could not move. She was encased, a living statue, a permanent, silent performance. The echoes had not just taken her body, they had encased her in her own art. What would you do when your own expression becomes your eternal prison? The invisible box had closed. Elara stood trapped in the circular chamber, her hands frozen in the final gesture. Before her, the core of the kinetic echoes pulsed, a maelstrom of shimmering, disconnected movements. It was the heart of the horror, and she was its prisoner. But the echoes were not done. The invisible box began to shimmer, its unseen walls vibrating with malevolent energy. Her prison was no longer still. It was alive, commanded by the core, ready to move her, to force her into a new, terrifying dance. A new pull began, not a twitch, but a deep, resonant tug from within the core itself. It commanded her entire being, demanding her full surrender. Her body, even within its invisible cage, began to tremble, ready to obey. Elara fought, a silent scream in her mind. This was her last stand. Her body was her only weapon. She tried to break the invisible box, to shatter the illusion of her prison. A desperate, final assertion of her will. But the echoes were not fooled. Her struggle was met with a grotesque twisting. The invisible box did not break. Instead, her hands, still trapped, began to perform a rapid, nonsensical drumming motion against the unseen walls. A frantic, humiliating display. The core pulsed faster, brighter. It was feeding on her despair, on her futile fight. The sound in the chamber, once a hum, now grew into a low, guttural thrum, a monstrous heartbeat of stolen motion. It was claiming her. Then a new compulsion, not just a movement, but a memory. The echoes reached into her mind, pulling forth the most painful moment of her past, the tragic performance, her greatest failure to communicate, the one that led to unspeakable loss. The despairing pose, the one that had ruined her on stage, began to form in her body. Her arms rose, her hands splayed. Her wrists rotated, slowly, agonizingly, into that familiar, heartbreaking gesture. It was forced, yet perfectly executed. This time it was not a fragment. The echoes compelled her to reenact the entire, agonizing sequence of her past trauma. Every step, every hesitant reach, every lost word played out through her unwilling flesh. A horrifying, complete replay. Her body was a stage, and the echoes were the director, forcing her to relive her deepest pain. Each movement was a fresh wound, each pose a stab to her fading identity. Her will, her very self, was being stripped away, piece by terrifying piece. Her mind screamed, but no sound escaped. Only the silent, forced movements. The mime, master of unspoken truth, was now a silent scream of endless torment. Her art, her life, weaponized against her by an ancient, malevolent force. The core of the echoes grew, expanding slightly, its light intensifying with each forced movement. It was feeding, not just on her kinesthetic energy, but on her very essence, her memories, her soul. She was becoming fuel. Her own gestures, the ones she had so carefully perfected, now flickered within the core. Twisted, distorted, they were no longer hers. They were raw energy, building blocks for the echo's ultimate, horrifying performance. The reenactment of her past trauma continued, a relentless loop. Each repetition stripped a layer of Elara away. Her identity blurred. Was she still Elara, or merely a memory played out by a body that was no longer her own? What would it be like to lose yourself, not to madness, but to a dance? To have your memories replaced by a grotesque choreography, your thoughts by a rhythm not your own. This was the horror of becoming truly empty. The core began to draw her closer, the invisible strings shortening. Her feet moved, slowly, deliberately, towards the swirling heart of the echoes. She was being pulled into its embrace, into its horrifying, eternal dance. Her body began to contort, mimicking the swirling chaos within the core. Not specific gestures, but a fluid, inhuman dance of absorption. Her limbs twisted, her spine arched, her head tilted back. She was merging. The terrifying truth dawned. The echoes didn't just want her movements, they wanted her to become part of their collective, to fuel their endless performance, to become a kinetic ghost herself, forever dancing. A final, desperate surge of will. Elara tried to perform one last gesture, not a dance, not a mimicry, but a single, pure act of defiance, a gesture of absolute stillness, to refuse to move even as she was being absorbed. For a fleeting moment, she held it, absolute stillness, a tiny island of defiance in a sea of compelled motion. The core seemed to hesitate, its pulsing light flickering, challenged by her ultimate refusal. But the echoes were ancient, patient. Her stillness was met, not with force, but with a horrifying mimicry. The core itself seemed to pause, mirroring her defiance. A silent, mocking challenge. It understood her art. Then, with a terrifying, slow grace, a single shimmering hand extended from the core. It performed the exact gesture of stillness, mirroring Elara's defiance. But then, it began to twist it. The still hand from the core slowly, agonizingly, began to clench, not into a fist, but into a grotesque, gnarled claw. The gesture of stillness, corrupted, turned into a symbol of agonizing paralysis. Elara felt the phantom pull. Her own hands, still in their defiant stillness, began to mimic the core's grotesque transformation. Her fingers curled, her muscles locked. Her stillness became a forced, painful paralysis. Her defiance was weaponized. Her very refusal to move was turned into a new form of torment. She was not just a puppet. She was a living statue, locked in a permanent, agonizing pose of forced stillness. The irony was a final, cruel joke. The core of the echoes thrummed with victory. It had not just broken her, it had consumed her. Her struggle, her art, her very identity had been absorbed into its endless, horrifying dance. She was no more, only the movements remained. Her eyes behind the mask were wide, reflecting the blinding, swirling light. But there was no fear left, no will, only the vacant gaze of a puppet whose strings were now woven into the very fabric of the entity that controlled it. Her body, now a permanent part of the core's influence, began to move again, not in a specific gesture, but in a slow, rhythmic sway, a part of the core's own pulse. She was no longer Elara. She was a kinetic echo. Her mime mask, once a symbol of expression, now a blank, terrifying face, merged with the swirling light. The last vestiges of her human form dissolved into the monstrous, living maelstrom of stolen movement. The chamber thrummed, the core pulsed, and within its depths, countless gestures, countless movements, danced an eternal, horrifying ballet. Elara was one of them, forever performing, forever consumed. Outside the abandoned theater, the city continued its silent, forced movements. People walked, talked, gestured, unaware of the new addition to the great, unseen performance, unaware of the heart that now beat beneath their streets. A man at a bus stop raised his hand not to wave, but to perform a quick, jerky rotation of his wrist. 3 times, nonsensical, repetitive. The same movement Elara had seen so long ago. The echoes were stronger now. A woman in a cafe lifted her coffee cup, but her fingers splayed and twitched, performing a bizarre, intricate dance before she could drink. Her eyes were distant, just another puppet in the endless show. The unseen strings were everywhere. They pulled at limbs, twisted bodies, compelled minds. The world was a vast stage, and humanity, its unwitting troupe, performed a dance of madness for an audience of nothing. The kinetic echoes had won. They had consumed their most defiant artist, turning her into another instrument in their horrifying symphony. And they would continue to grow, to spread, to claim every purposeful movement. What would you do when your own body becomes a cage, when your very identity is erased, replaced by the dance of a malevolent entity, when your will is just another string pulled by an unseen hand? The silence of the night was broken only by the whispers of the wind, but if you listened closely, truly listened, you could almost hear it. The faint, rhythmic thrumming from beneath the city, the beat of a monstrous heart. And sometimes, in the quiet moments when you least expect it, you might feel a subtle tug, a phantom twitch in your fingers, a momentary jerk of your head, a movement you didn't choose, a whisper of a command not your own. It begins small, always small, a seemingly innocent tick. Then it grows, stronger, more demanding, until your body is no longer yours, until you are just another dancer in the echo's endless, horrifying performance. Look at your hands. Are they truly yours, or are they waiting for the next command, because the echoes are always watching, always listening, and they are always, always dancing. What will your first involuntary movement be?